You're listening to the Dean Obeidallah Show on Sirius XM's Progress.
And welcome back, Dean Obeidallah Show tonight. We're live Wednesday, November 6th night, packed with great guests. Right now, Leah Greenberg and Ezra Levin, they are married. They're co-founders and co-executive director of Indivisible, a great organization which we've had people on since 2017, since your inception. It's great to see both of you here in studio and talking about your brand new book called We Are Indivisible, a blueprint for democracy after Trump.
Hey, thanks for having us, Dean.
Great to be here.
So let's go back, because your book is broken down in different ways. It's sort of a memoir, but it's a blueprint on how to change things. But first, let me ask you about last night's results. You had Virginia and Kentucky. When you look at that, and you both were staffers, you worked on Capitol Hill, you're part and parcel of our grassroots movement. What do those victories say to you? And it could be different, or break it down however you want to get into it.
Well, look, I think one of the big questions that was coming, that we were all looking at going into last night was what was the impact that impeachment was going to have on these elections. Right. Republicans have been claiming that impeachment was going to fire up their base, that we were really going to regret it. I think that the results, especially out of Kentucky, demonstrate that that is just not the case. So that is huge.
Look, we're winning. And people have been asking us from the very beginning, when the Indivisible groups were showing up at congressional town halls in February of 2017, we got asked, well, are they going to be around come St. Patrick's Day? People actually asked us that. Now it's nearly 3 years later, and the blue wave that started building in 2017, crashed in 2018, is now building again. And I think it's pretty incontrovertible, the evidence that we got yesterday, that the people aren't going home. Our people are continuing to stay engaged, and they're defining what's possible, not just at the national level, but in places like Virginia and Kentucky, too.
It's interesting. I think Kentucky is a big headline grabber. Yep. You know, I had people from Kentucky call in and tell us how unpopular Levin was, and don't discount that. And I understand that. But Virginia both chambers were Republican controlled, much more so in 2017. Trump comes in 2017, and we chipped away little by little. I know you guys were working on that very much. And now, the first time in 2 decades, we have both chambers, and you have a Democratic governor at the same time. This is really, I think, to me, Virginia is actually a bigger deal on some level than Kentucky.
And keep in mind, the Democratic Party that took control of Virginia this year is very different than the Democratic Party that once had control a couple decades ago. This is a much more progressive party. Virginia is turning blue, and it's turning blue by embracing pretty darn progressive policies. And
a diverse group of candidates who won. The Democratic Party in Virginia now, at one point, was probably mostly white guys, just like everywhere else, is crazily diverse. In fact, they've elected the first Muslim American to the state Senate this time, and we already have 2 in the House of Delegates. But you have more people of color background, transgender Americans serving in there. And to me, I love that. To me, it shows that, at least this is my view, and I might be naive, but America at its core is embracing. We really are. And Trump is the opposite of that. And that's winning.
Well,
and I would say, I was the policy director for a Virginia gubernatorial candidate in 2017 for Tom Perriello, who was running in the
Nice
primary.
guy. I had him on my show.
He's a great guy. And I remember just early 2017, he would go into rooms with Virginia Democratic political insiders, and he would say, I think in 2017, we can flip the House of Delegates and we can win the governorship. I think in 2019, we can win the Senate. People would treat him like he was crazy. They were like, please don't say that. Don't get people's hopes up. That is unbelievable. And, it just shows how far we've come, how quickly we've come, that people, this is now reality, that we were playing on a rigged map. This is a Republican gerrymandered map, and nonetheless, Democrats have been able to take both chambers now.
When Trump came to power, there was only 16 Democratic governors. Now we took 9 back, so we're at 24 to 26. If we hold on to, in the election coming up in Louisiana, that'll stay there, and then 2020, we might tip it, which is important for things like gerrymandering. Well, it shouldn't be called gerrymandering, redistricting after the census, but it will be gerrymandering. So let's talk about your book, We Are Indivisible, a blueprint for democracy after Trump. Tell people a little bit, like superheroes, what's your origin story? Because I know the origin story, and your book starts out great, like how November 8th is like the world's worst house party, election night house party ever, which took me right back to, I was here.
Sorry to take you through that again.
Oh my God.
We get past that pretty quickly in the book. You don't need to relive that trauma.
I was at the Javits Center. I was sent from here to go to Javits Center to report on the victory. And I got there, and it was already starting to settle in. Thousands of people, like in silence. I'm like, what is going on? And I went up to the VIP section. That was the media could be there. And they were like, I think she's... And then some staffers were like, there's no way she can win. They were there. I'm like, what are you talking about? This can't be happening. So that's the starting point of your book. So tell us the origin story of Indivisible.
So we were going through the stages of grief, just about everybody in Javits Center and our friends in the progressive space across the country, and we really landed on anger, and we stayed there for a while. And that drove us, I think, in a very productive direction, because as dark as that moment was, there was this really bright silver lining, which was people who were not involved in politics suddenly were saying, what can I do to help? How can I resist? And Leah and I, as former congressional staffers, we don't have many applicable skills, but we know how Congress works. And so we thought, hey, we saw how the Tea Party rose up. We didn't agree with their racism. We didn't agree with their violence. We didn't agree with their ideology, but they were effective at defensive actions at the local level. They focused on their members of Congress, and they never gave an inch, and they really limited what Barack Obama could do, even though he was a popularly elected president. Sure. And so we wrote this guide, the Indivisible Guide, which said, hey, you can actually wield power at the local level. You can do something right now. We don't have the House, the Senate, or the presidency, but if you get 20 of your friends together, you can call yourself an indivisible group, focus on your representative and your 2 senators, and you can change what is politically possible, which was kind of a fantastical idea at the time. In December of 2016, I remember vividly, within 24 hours of each other, there were 2 stories. One, a future Trump appointee said, positively citing the Japanese internment camps during World War II.
I remember that.
As an example of how to deal with the refugees and Muslim and immigrant populations. And within 24 hours of that, there was a New York Times piece, an interview with incoming Democratic Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, in which he said, well, we lost the election. We're just going to have to figure out how to make deals with the other side. So the possible future world in 2017 was one in which the roads on the way to America's new internment camps were well paved. And that was terrifying to us. And we thought there was an alternative. You could actually stand up. And so we wrote this Google Doc. We tweeted it out to our dozens of followers on Twitter, and that was it. And we thought maybe it will be useful in the future. And shockingly, people read it. And then even more shockingly, they started forming indivisible groups all over the country.
I recall watching Ezra, and maybe both of you, but I recall you like on Rachel Maddow or something like that when I first heard about this group. And I was on a different channel. I was on Insight, which wasn't political. And I just moved here. I'm like, this group sounds great, because I wanted my show not to be a normal radio show. I want to be an activist platform where people were making differences, be them candidates or grassroots organizers, come on to try to get more people so we win elections. Because it's not about talking about issues, it's about winning elections. So you guys were a big part. So the big first fight I had so many indivisible people on was for fighting against the repeal of the ACA.
That's right.
Was that your biggest victory at the beginning? How did that work out for you guys? Was that number one focus?
Worked out well for us.
It worked well. This Affordable Care Act is still the law of the land, so...
no, but I mean, that like when you were... You're absolutely right. No, it worked out great. But when you were looking at it, like, did you go, we could actually do this? Because I had people on from your show, and I'm like, and from your Indivisible on the show, and they'd say, we could do this. I'm like, we're not going to do this. No, in my head, I'm like, they have all the votes. They had the votes. That was the problem.
And it was the top legislative priority of this unified conservative government. The House had passed a repeal of the Affordable Care Act dozens of times. The House and the Senate had passed it once and required a veto from Obama. There were predictions that they might repeal the Affordable Care Act on the first day of the presidency. I think you were right to be skeptical in that moment, but we were seeing something else on the ground.
And I do remember vividly the moment in February 2017, and Ezra looked at me. We were like sitting at the kitchen table, and he just goes, I think we might win. I think we might be able to save the Affordable Care Act. And so it was a little earlier than other folks, because we were seeing this incredible wave of energy and organizing that was already happening. Just a few weeks before, it started popping up at town halls all over the country.
And the magic here was not just that people in New York City or in San Francisco or traditional activists were standing up. It was that people in East Tennessee were organizing and going in their deep red districts and saying in thick Southern accents, I will be dead or bankrupt if you take away the Affordable Care Act. And having that kind of organization all over the country, we didn't know where the cracks were going to show. We didn't know it was ultimately going to be John McCain or Lisa Murkowski or Jerry Moran or Susan Collins, who ultimately voted against it from time to time over the course of the fight for the Affordable Care Act. We knew somebody was going to cave. And so if we all pressed, if we all did our job, maybe we could win. And ultimately, that's what happened.
I recall vividly people calling and some literally crying on the phone to me about what will happen if the ACA is repealed. And I just had John Delaney on, and I've had other candidates on, and I've mentioned to you when you were walking the hall, like Julian Castro and others. And I bring up to all of them the same thing. When you're talking about healthcare, please remind Americans that the Trump DOJ is in federal court right now trying to end every benefit of the ACA.
Yep.
And it's because of their doing. They got rid of the tax part of it that kept it alive. They were warned, because I went back and found articles at the time, they were warned you could end up dismantling the entire scheme of the ACA. If you repeal this, they didn't care. They've done this. So I want people to remember that. There was something I learned from Indivisible people came on, and I can't remember who, but probably all of them, and know about this thing about being effective in lobbying Congress, that phone calls matter, but phone calls from their district matter more than anything, and that congressional, because they were all staffers. I said, would your member actually look at the numbers of calls? They said, yep, they would. And then I would start getting members of Congress on. I started asking that, and they said, yes, we will. So I learned that, and that was a great lesson. Share a little bit about why it's so important. If you live in the district, why they actually listen. And if you don't live in the district, you can call all day. You're just sort of wasting your time.
Well, at the core of everything that we do is this sort of basic idea, which is every elected official wakes up every morning thinking about how to get reelected,
right.
Or how to move on to their next bigger and better position. And that governs pretty much everything they do. They have a congressional office that is set up to both do their job and to perform their job, right? To both vote on legislation and then let their constituents know why they're voting on legislation and really build that PR effect, to answer letters from people so that people know that their elected official is listening, to basically give, with everything that they do, convey the impression that your elected official cares about you, is working hard for you, shares your values. And as a constituent, you have the power to either reaffirm that narrative or to disrupt that narrative with your actions. And so organized constituent pressure can be enormously powerful because you're actually either helping them get reelected or you're making it harder for them to get reelected with whatever you do. And so, when somebody shows up to a town hall and they say, hey, without the Affordable Care Act, I would be dead or bankrupt. They are lobbying for the Affordable Care Act. They are, begging someone to protect them and to protect their livelihood and to save the Affordable Care Act. They're also helping to set the narratives that will affect the next election. And so centrally, every elected official cares about their constituents because their constituents are the difference between whether they get reelected or not. And that's also why they don't necessarily care about the people who are outside of their district, because those folks, they're not going to vote for you.
And so in the book, we actually draw 19 specific lessons from power building over the course of the last 3 years. So it was the fight over the ACA that we tell, it's the fight over DACA, the protections for immigrant youth that we tell, and the fight to build the blue wave. And the book is intended to be quite practical. We want to tell the stories from the movement, but we want people who have been on the outskirts of this movement, who maybe have made a call, maybe they haven't, but they're looking at the country right now. They know something's wrong, and they want to figure out how to be part of it. And we wanted to make it as easy as possible for folks who haven't yet gotten involved to get involved.
In your lessons, you have one. It's really common sense, but it was great to see it in writing. People have opinions, groups have power.
Yeah.
And I love that because share why you had to put that in writing, because it's so simple, but when I read it, it's like light bulb.
So this is a central idea within Indivisible. Our unit of activism is not the individual. We need individuals, but individual activism wanes. It's very natural. The natural thing that happens is you have kids or a new job or you move, whatever happens, the traditional trajectory is you might make calls for a little bit, you might go to an event or two, but eventually you're not going to be there. Groups build legitimacy and they build leadership. So the Indivisible movement, if you Google image search Indivisible logo, you'll see the national Indivisible logo, which we love, and you can buy a shirt with it. That's great. But more importantly, you will see literally hundreds of other local Indivisible group logos because these groups at the local level are leading it and owning it on the ground. And so they get invited onto great shows like yours, or they get it cited by local press. They actually are seen as experts because they have legitimacy. They're based in these communities. And it's also what's allowed us to still exist 3 years later. The reason why we are still here talking to you 3 years after this volunteer army started building a resistance is because whenever something atrocious happens, like the Muslim ban or like the family separations or DACA being rescinded or the healthcare fight, people who were never paying attention before, some number of them pay attention and they ask themselves, what can I do? And the answer for some of them is, oh, there's an Indivisible group down the block. I can show up at their weekly meeting.
I had so many people call when in the early stages, like, where should we get involved? And others would call in and go, I'm involved in Indivisible. Yeah. And then on Twitter, a lot of times people would tweet to me things and I would retweet what was going on. Just so people understand, by the way, how many do you have a number of chapters that you know now? Is there?
We have thousands of chapters, literally in every single congressional district in the country. So from the reddest red to the bluest blue, some of our strongest chapters are in deep red and rural areas. And I'm from rural Texas, so that warms my heart. I think it is very important that we organize everywhere. And in places where there hasn't been much progressive infrastructure, especially in the South, especially in red and rural areas, people who are in districts that voted for Trump by 70%, there are still 30% of people who don't want him to be president, don't agree with his agenda. And what they have started to do is build up this powerhouse just by showing up in their own communities and saying, hey, I know my district voted for this guy, but I don't agree with him. And that itself is a radical act. Starting from there, eventually you get to electing new representatives.
So let's take a quick break. When we come back, I want to talk about winning in 2020, but such an important thing. Your book, We Are Indivisible, A Blueprint for Democracy After Trump. Talk about after we win, because I believe we're going to win in 2020. And if we get the Senate as well, your blueprint for ending the rigged system that we have, and you articulate it so well in your book, we have a rigged system in so many areas, from the courts to the media. I'm rigged. I'm fine. I'm rigged for the left.
Yeah.
But from Congress, the House, the Senate, and all that, I think that's just as practical. What's remarkable about the book, it is practical advice for how to effectuate change, because often it can seem, if you don't have that practical advice, it could seem overwhelming, and people check out. I've had climate change experts on so many times. I go, you guys, you got to make this easier for people to feel like they can have an input, because if you don't, they'll be like, I'm on board, but I really can't change things. And I've even had conversations with Steve Bullock about it, and other experts on it. But let's take a quick break, come right back right after this.
The Dean Obeidallah Show.
Voting is the most important civil right of our era, because the right to vote preserves all other rights. It's not the Second Amendment. It's not guns. It's voting.
Sirius XM Progress.
New perspectives, important voices, influential ideas. This is the Dean Obeidallah Show on Sirius XM Progress 127.
And welcome back, Dean Obeidallah Show. We're live here Wednesday, November 6th, and we're talking to Leah Greenberg and Ezra Levin, the authors and co-founders and co-executive directors of Indivisible, but their new book, We Are Indivisible, A Blueprint for Democracy After Trump. And it truly is a hands-on way to effectuate change. So let's talk a little bit about 2020, if people want to get involved, and what we need to do to win that election and win the Senate as well. So give us a nutshell of that.
The way we win in 2020 is by getting involved right now. I think there's a common misconception that elections are won by a get out the vote effort in October or November. That is the last stage in the fight. What we found in Indivisible was leading up to the 2018 blue wave, the same groups that were the strongest in getting out the vote, in registering voters, in endorsing candidates, those groups got strong by engaging in 2017 on the legislative fights around healthcare, around DACA, around taxes, around nominations. That's how they built their power. So we are in 2019 right now. We're nearing the end of 2019. There is going to be a fight over the budget. There's going to be a fight over whether or not the House impeaches. There are going to be other things that happen this year. It might not seem like that's directly connected to whether or not Trump or the Republicans maintain control of Congress and the presidency. They are directly connected. So the best way for you to get involved right now is to get involved locally and focus on the issues that are relevant right now.
So once we beat Donald Trump, after a lot of work, it's going to be a lot. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be a tough work. It is. They have a lot of money on their side, but I honestly believe in my heart we will beat Donald Trump. I also hope we win the Senate back, which is so important. Now, a big part of your book is after we win a day one democracy agenda, and you talk about things, our system being rigged in various ways. It's odd. I don't know why I didn't see what is so plain to me now about the system being fundamentally rigged. And I think a lot of us were woke in a way to things like it was a whole new world. It really is like we took a pill and saw like, oh my God, why is this happening like this? And that's where, so let's go through a few. One is the filibusters. Do you want Leah take that one? Like why we have to get rid of it?
The filibuster is this arcane loophole in the system of federal government. It is just a sort of an accident of Senate procedure that gives 41 senators the power to block legislation, which is to say that it gives senators who represent around 11% of the U.S. population the ability to have a veto power over the other 89%. And so whenever we're wondering about why something popular can't move out of Congress, why we can't get basic gun violence prevention legislation, why we couldn't get a public option for the Affordable Care Act, anything that you wanted to see happen in the Obama administration that didn't happen, usually the answer is the filibuster. And we can't continue to have that be the way that we operate. We cannot give Mitch McConnell a veto power over our federal agenda in 2021 if we win, if we have the Senate. And he absolutely will act as if he's got a veto power if we allow him to. He has already announced that he intends to be the Grim Reaper of progressive legislation.
That's his name for
I know,
himself.
I've
That's
written about
literally
that.
his own name. And
he
so,
likes that.
Yeah, so the choice
He doesn't
is
like
just if we're
Moscow
gonna
Mitch,
do
though,
it.
so we can use that a lot. So we like that one.
Exactly.
So how do you change the filibuster rule? Because it's, as you point on the book, it's not in the Constitution. It's a procedural thing. So how do you change that?
It's literally just a majority vote. That's the incredible
So you don't need the 60 votes to
rules.
stop debate to change that rule, just a majority.
Nope.
And in fact, we know that because Mitch McConnell himself has changed the filibuster twice since Donald Trump got elected. He changed it once in order to install two religious right ideologues to the Supreme Court, and once to expedite his Trump's appointments. So even Mitch McConnell is willing to change the filibuster. The alternative to this is we take the presidency, we hold the House, we take the Senate, and then in 2021 we get nothing done.
Right.
Our choice will be between keeping this obscure procedural loophole or getting legislation passed.
And obviously you address it, but you know the argument, because even well-intended progressives going, what happens when they win it back? They could do hideous things, and that's true. They already have, through budget reconciliation, the ability to do certain things by a simple majority vote, which they try to do with the ACA repeal. But what's your argument to those progressives who are like, I'm worried when the Republicans get it, they might do horrible things to us?
Well, I would say, what I would say is that the filibuster did not protect the ACA from repeal. The ACA's own popularity protected the ACA from repeal. Republicans could never actually get the 50 votes they needed to repeal the ACA. That's what they would have been able to get, or that's what they would have needed if they'd gotten rid of the filibuster. So it wasn't a matter of the filibuster saving anything. And fundamentally, I think we should just be under no illusions that if the Republicans ever need to get rid of the filibuster to do one of their top priorities, they will. They've already done it for judges. They've already done it, or they've already used the budget process in order to move their tax legislation. They will do what they need to do to pass their agenda, and we should be under no illusions that anything we do is going to affect that.
And also, as progressives, we can't afford to fear the will of the people. So I don't think that we should just get rid of the filibuster for any reason. I think we should get rid of the filibuster in order to pass historic democracy reform legislation that ensures that our system is actually reflective of the will of the people. The other side knows that the country is getting more diverse and more unequal. So what they do is they change the rules of the game to entrench their own power, to entrench the power of disproportionately white wealthy guys. But if we change the rules of the game to actually reflect the will of the people, then yes, in some future world, there might be a Republican Congress or a Republican president that wins a fair election that they can't steal or buy and have to actually respond to the people when they're passing legislation. And you know what? That's democracy. And I think our ideas are better, and we will win if we have less gridlock and a more functional government.
And as you note in your book, President Obama slammed the filibuster, saying it makes it almost impossible to effectively govern. And that's absolutely true, because what he could have passed in his first 2 years, which could have saved the Senate for future years, because not the party of no stopping things everywhere does not allow us to show our potential as Democrats, what we're really about.
That's right.
Let's talk about another one that comes up now. A lot of 2020 candidates are talking about, and that is Supreme Court changes.
Yep.
What do you want? Because it's not as simple. What do you think? First of all, what is the problem with the Supreme Court, and what are ideas to change it?
Well, the problem with the Supreme Court is that 15 of the last 19 justices have been appointed by Republicans.
15 of 19?
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
That is ridiculous.
When you think about who's won the popular vote for the last 20, 30, 40 years, that is not in line at all. And, it's not just an accident, right? Republicans have been willing to go to extreme lengths in order to preserve their control of the Supreme Court, from blocking Merrick Garland to confirming a man who's credibly accused of sexual assault. And fundamentally, we have two problems here. One is that Republicans have essentially created a situation where the Federalist Society controls the Supreme Court, which means that they're going to be setting our laws for the future.
Exactly.
The other is that act has called the legitimacy of the Supreme Court into question, because fundamentally they've been playing hardball in a way that makes a mockery of the premise of nonpartisan courts. And so we have to actually reform the courts in a way that both, reestablishes a balance ideologically, but also helps to protect their future legitimacy.
And there's various proposals. Super court. But what do you think? Anyone that we don't have to get into great details, or one that you like of the reform ideas?
So I think any reform needs to tackle two issues, which is one, we need to unpack the packing that's been done in some way. So we need to rebalance the court. The Republicans have packed it. We need to unpack it. And two, we need to restore legitimacy. So that could mean something like adding justices, implementing term limits. There's plans around rotating judges on and off appeals courts and on the Supreme Courts. Look, we just want to see the presidential candidates who are currently vying for control of the Democratic Party to tell us how they're planning to fix it, because we have this problem. There's nothing we can do about having this problem. We've got it. And so tell us how you're going to fix it.
And you talk about democratizing the media. How do we do this?
There hasn't been a major public investment in American media since the creation of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting more than 50 years ago. The fact of the matter is the internet exists now. Classifieds aren't moneymakers for local media. The business model for local media has evaporated. It's died. So in order to have a functioning democracy, you need an informed citizenry.
I agree.
The free market is not producing it. It is a market failure. That means we need a simple solution. We need public investment in informing our electorate. So there are a lot of ideas out there. You could create something like the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, but specifically for local media. You could give everybody a nonprofit media voucher. Every American could have $200 that they could give to a local nonprofit media source that they want. There are ideas out there. Great organization, national organization called Free Press has looked into this for years. It's not rocket science. This is not hard stuff to do. It doesn't require a constitutional amendment. It doesn't require moving heaven and earth. This is simple legislation that 15 months from today could be enacted into law.
How do we stop Fox News? Is that part of it? No, I'm kidding. Fox News does its thing. What do you talk also about democratizing the House and the Senate, but voting, which is to me the key to everything. And I like your practical approach. I've talked to people about voting issues. We have to just come out more. I get that part of it, but there are laws in place and policies in place by the right. Yep. We on the left try to make it easier. We want to enfranchise people. They literally want to disenfranchise anyone who's going to vote against them. So what do we do?
Well, I think we should tease that out a bit, because it's not all Republicans who are trying to disenfranchise folks. It's Republican elites who are in elected office who are trying to do that. We saw in Florida in 2018, the same year that Floridians elected a Republican senator, a Republican state legislature, and a Republican governor, they passed overwhelmingly the largest reenfranchisement of Americans since the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Then the Republican electeds went through in this year and gutted it. But that's not to say that Republican voters somehow want it to be more difficult to vote. It is actually somewhat bipartisan to say it should be tough to steal elections, it should be easy to vote. That should be just a simple American value. So you can enfranchise literally tens of millions of new Americans. You can provide a pathway to citizenship for American immigrants. You can ensure that people are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated can vote. You can lower the voting age. Again, none of this is rocket science. None of this requires a constitutional amendment. This is all simple legislation that a pro-democracy Congress and a pro-democracy president could make law.
And last thing, because you're lesson number one, and you touched on before, is reelection. With that in mind, is there a place that we can get to where Republicans, the elected officials, see Donald Trump as so toxic because impeachment, say more evidence, not now, but more evidence comes out. If reelection is what they're all about, and it is, that in their own mind, to be reelected, they have to jettison Donald Trump from the top of their ticket. Is that a scenario that's possible?
It's not impossible. It's not close, though. And I think that fundamentally, the only thing that we can do is try to do everything we can to make him as toxic as possible. But we should be under no illusions. His base is sticking with him, even in a moment that is as unimaginable as any of us could possibly wrap our heads around. And so as long as Republicans are facing primary challenges on the right, it is unlikely that they are going to split from him, or at least it's unlikely that anyone who wants to keep getting reelected splits from him.
But there are more of us than there are of them. And I think that's the key thing we need to internalize, that if we show up, we win. And that's not just me being starry-eyed, idealist. We saw this in 2017 when we defeated the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. We saw this in 2018 when we took the House. Nobody said we could take the House. In 2017, we did. We saw this now in impeachment where we were moving forward. We are now going to build the wave. It's not going to build itself. But if you get involved now, you can be part of making this a reality.
And if people want to find out first about Indivisible, what's the website again? Although we've given out countless times on the show. Tell people.
You can go to just indivisible.org. I will say, we are an Indivisible book. It's by Leah and me. We wrote it. Our names, though, aren't even on the cover, and that's intentional. They're on the spine, but not on the cover, because this book isn't for us. It's not about us. It's for this movement. It's intended to help grow this movement, and 100% of proceeds, author proceeds, go to Indivisible. We don't get a dime from it. This is about building the movement for democracy headed into 2021.
What a contrast to Donald Trump. Every penny would go to Donald Trump. I want to thank you both. And the book is great, folks. It's called We Are Indivisible, A Blueprint for Democracy After Trump. And again, what I love about it is that it's practical, hands-on advice by people who've worked on the Hill, who've worked for elected officials. It's not this kind of political science stuff, which is nice to read. I like it. But this is real stuff. And you guys have made a difference. And in 2020... you're going to be an important part of leadership on the grassroots. And we look forward to having more Indivisible people on. We've had many on. We're going to have many more. Yes. So Leah and Ezra, nice seeing you in person again. Ezra and Leah, nice meeting you, and I wish you the best with the book.
Dean, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
We'll be back with more of the Dean Obeidallah Show right after this quick break.
Dean Obeidallah Show on Sirius XM Progress 127.
You're listening to the Dean Obeidallah Show, Sirius XM's Progress.
And welcome back, Dean Obeidallah Show. We're live Wednesday, November 6th. And who's in studio? It is my friend, your friend, the one and only John Fugelsang, who hosts right after this his own show for the next 3 hours. So don't go anywhere. It's live. John, day 3. You're back. I lost that bet.
There goes that. I thought popular demand. They're still letting me in the building.
People called it. We want to go back to replays.
Bishop Tutu wrote an angry letter, and Jimmy Carter and Bono co-signed it, and they're still letting me in here.
So, my friend, early in the show, we had a really spirited conversation about the election results last night in Virginia and in Kentucky and what it meant to people. What does one look like it's more important to you than the other in the big picture, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a bad night for Trump, and you have the audio of Donald Trump saying 2 nights ago, "If I don't win, I'm going to look really bad. So you have to do this for me," because he knows what this is about. It's about him, and so does the cult. It just proves something that we already know. If there's high turnout, Democrats win. If there's low turnout, the status quo remains, and they're always more organized. When you should choose not to show up and vote, especially in state and local elections, there's a racist who's going to go vote in your place.
And our other part of the conversation, of course, was the developing with impeachment. But Lindsey Graham saying today, we played the clip, "I'm not reading any transcripts, and the whole thing's a sham, of course." And then he added, Trump is too incoherent to do extortion.
Well, you know what? Mueller decided Don Jr. was too stupid to have been guilty of collusion. So it's the hard bigotry of low expectations. But Lindsey Graham, at least he's consistent. He would do anything for his donors 20 years ago, does anything for his donors now, doesn't care about the morality behind it.
And last 35, 40 seconds here. Who's on your show tonight, my friend?
Bassem Youssef.
Oh, my friend. I know.
Yeah, you're a very good friend. He's doing some shows at the Stress Factory. He's going to be joining us. We'll also have Bob Seska of Salon.com, and then a very funny all-male comedian panel, including Oscar Iden. We have a gay Latin, we have an African American, and we have Eddie Brill. So and we're going to discuss T.I. and his disgusting misogyny towards women, which has surpassed his lyrics.
John, I wish you an all-male. Men aren't funny, so that's going to be a rough one.
You know what? But men, there are funny men. You just got to look for them.
Stick around, folks. We're taking a break. Coming back with John Fugelsang live right here the next 3 hours. Thanks for tuning in. Look forward to chatting with you tomorrow night right here on the Dean Obeidallah Show.